Hello and welcome to NARC Live on Wednesday the 10th of November 2021. Coming to you live from Norfolk on the east coast of England with Tammy M0TC.
Hello.
And me, David G7URP. Good to see you. On tonight's show, ICNIRP review. There's just 1 week before you have to make an assessment if you transmit on 110 megahertz or higher. Paul SQ1NXQ sends us these pictures from Poland. Yes, it's a train, but it's not my fault. And we find out what on earth this is. Now, as you may have seen on Facebook, we only realised this afternoon that we actually haven't been receiving any emails here today because our ISP, which is PlusNet, have a total email failure for everybody, I believe. So if you're on PlusNet and haven't had any emails today, that's why. Now, that means that we haven't received any answers we've had from you today. We had them, I think, emails up to about 1 o'clock in the morning. So if you sent an answer to this today, we're really sorry. But if you put your answer on BATC or on Facebook, we will give you full points for that. All right, if you know what this object is. But first, we haven't got much news from you, and that may be because we haven't had any emails today that we only realised later. But anyway, we have had a few, and these firstly are some pictures from Paul SQ1NXQ, or G4XBT as you might know him better as. And he sent us these pictures. He says, I took these over the weekend at our local train stations. It's a narrow gauge steam train which used to run between Koszalin and our hometown of Rosnovo. It's recently been overhauled, and this was its first run in over 35 years between the two stations. So hopefully it'll be back in full service by next summer, pulling coaches for the tourists again. It's really different, isn't it? I like the front of the boiler there with those bits. I know that you're thinking exactly the same, aren't you, Tammy?
It's
looking
a
at your
train.
face. It's a black one, yeah, with red wheels. But no, isn't that nice though? And it's unusual because it's narrow gauge. It's not full size. It's a bit like the one on the Bure Valley Railway. You know, it's kind of mid-size, and yet from that picture it looks
big,
bigger.
doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It looks bigger than the ones on the Bure Valley. But anyway, Paul, thank you ever so much for sharing those with us. And we've only got one other bit of news from you, really, which is from Doug2E0YWP. It's an appeal rather than a bit of news, I guess. Just says, if anybody has got a spare 12-volt, 20-amp or higher power supply that you'd like to sell, then could you get in touch? I guess if you get in touch via us, at least from tomorrow, we think our emails will be back, according to PlusNet. If you get back in touch with us, and then we'll put you in touch with Doug if you've got one to sell. This is the email address, radio@dcpmicro.com, and we haven't said this before, but I believe that emails to that and anybody else's on PlusNet are just bouncing back now. So don't send any emails today. I think, Tammy, was it tomorrow?
Well, they thought it was going to be tomorrow morning, but
tomorrow morning. So I never normally say this, but don't send us any emails tonight because I think they'll be bounced back. So send us an email from sort of tomorrow afternoon onwards, and then we should get it. So as I said, apologies for anybody who has sent us anything today, including answers to the competition. We haven't had emails. I had an email from somebody actually just past midnight for the show, so I know it was working then. But normal service will be resumed as soon as possible, as they say. So that's it with the news, Tammy. Little people, what have you got for us this week?
Little people, yeah. Well, we've just had some fireworks, so the little people are having their fireworks today.
Oh, yes. Oh. And topical for us electricians as well, isn't it?
Yep.
Now, as I'm sad, I'm counting the number of strands. 1, 2, 3. I think that's 16
10.
strands. Do you reckon?
Well, there's only 10 you can
Oh,
see.
10, okay. It could be 10 strand, yeah. It's always a multiple so that they can fit round in a nice cable, you know.
Is it?
That's why you have 7, 10 and 16, I think it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Or 13 sometimes. Anyway, that's lovely. I'm taking it too seriously, aren't I?
You are.
What is the guy doing there?
But he's lighting another one.
And that is a piece of insulation, I guess.
Yeah, to make some
It's good,
fireworks
isn't it?
come out of it.
It's nice. Simple. Sometimes the simplest idea is the best.
Yep.
Miniature-calendar.com, as always, is where these pictures come from. Thanks to them for letting us show one of these every week. So, as I said, we haven't had much news from you this week. So do keep in touch. Send us those pictures of whatever it is. It doesn't have to be trains. We do like them, but it doesn't have to be trains. Anything at all. Well, I like trains. Anything at all, radio. What you've been doing is the way of keeping in touch. Just send them to the usual address, radio@dcpmicro.com. There we are, bottom of your screen now. So now on to that competition. What on earth is this? And what on earth is this? Now, those of you who looked at it in high resolution or something as well, you may have noticed on there is a model 1027. That might have given some of you a bit of a help, I don't know. But we have, again, quite diverse answers. We'll see how you did. Have anybody answered on?
Yeah, we got one online.
Okay, what's that? So, Graham Bohr says, is it a knurling tool? Okay, we'll keep that thought. Anybody on the other side?
No.
All right. Steve G4GHO says, the object this week is probably a Jones & Shipman Model 1027 multi-head knurling tool for lathe use. See, he used the info on the screen. Okay. Peter M0VRA says, I think this week's what on earth is it is a wire tensioner often used on railway fencing. Tammy?
Mark M0YCT of Munsley says, I think the latest picture is of a lathe tool for a knurling round steel. You can rotate the end and get coarse or fine knurled finish. Okay,
Steve G3VA says, I think this week's what on earth is it is a glass cutter.
John G8VPE, I think it looks rather like a knurling tool for use on a lathe to make that diamond type finger grip surface, commonly seen on PL259, N-type and other threaded connectors.
Tom G8XQD says, not sure. I can't choose between an oak dining table and oak flooring.
What?
I think if you look at the picture.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. It took me a while. I must admit, when I read it, I thought, is he entering the right competition? Anyway, he says it's a nice old 3-option knurling tool, model 1027 for scaling, though.
Bob GASDU says, is it a ratchet tool for sockets?
David 2E0FRD says, at a guess, I think it's a multi-wheeled knurling tool used on a lathe by a machinist to create grips on things like handlebars and torches.
Nev M0NFY, is it a glass tile cutter or a sewing machine? I think he guessed a sewing machine last week, didn't he?
One week,
theme going on.
if we do this for long enough, maybe Nev, you'll get your wish. Actually, he was there a minute ago.
Nev is there.
He's there. Okay. Actually, should we show everybody at home, actually? We didn't do that, did we?
No, we didn't. No.
Is that going to throw you completely by doing that? Let's say hello to the 6 people that we've got there at home. Hello. Show you're alive, and the middle picture is Stephen M6KY, who's gone somewhere. But it doesn't matter. Thanks for joining us. For anybody else, you can join us, of course. You can get all the details off the newsletter on the front page of the website. Anyway, back to the script, as they say. Mike G8EEY says, this week's item looks like a multi-headed knurling tool for use on a lathe. I think we're getting a common sort of theme here. Dave G3VSJ says, this week's what's this looks like an old glass or tile cutter that's in need of a soak in WD-40. He says. Colin G0ODR says, this week's what on earth is a knurling tool. It's used on a metalworking lathe and depending on the wheels installed imprints various designs onto the outside diameter of a piece of metal to aid gripping the finished item when in use. That's a really nice complex answer. But I'm going to, the best answer, comprehensive answer, was probably because he's a teacher. I think that means he can explain it well, which is from Simon M0 SIH, who says the item on this week's what on earth is this is a knurling tool, which is used to press a pattern onto a round section of metal. The lathe is set so that the chuck revolves at a low speed. The knurling tool is then pressed against the rotating steel and pressure is slowly increased until the tool produces a pattern on the steel. The automatic control lever is engaged, which starts the automatic traverse of the saddle. As the saddle moves along the bed of the lathe, the knurled pattern is pressed into the steel along its length. If the traverse of the lathe is stopped and then reversed, a diamond pattern is produced. That's what I call an answer.
That is a good answer.
But anyway, we better just find out officially what it is. But by Phil G4LPP, who sent us that picture, it is.
It is a knurling tool.
For embossing decorative scrollwork on soft metal. Brilliant.
Well done, everybody.
Thank you very much. Got you going, though, some of you. I love some of the answers, really quite believable. Wire tensioner. I can look at that and think, yeah, that could have been a wire tensioner. Brilliant. Thank you very much for all the entries. Sorry again, one more time. if you did enter it today on an email and say, here's my answer, that's why, because we haven't had any emails, I'm afraid, today. Okay, so let's now challenge you further and ask you, what on earth is this? Have a close look. We'll leave this on the screen a little bit longer than normal, because if you are technically minded and you look at it closely enough, I think you might be able to reason out what that is. So it's really right back in radio amateurs quarters now. If you look at that, look at what it is. I'm not going to help you, but you just need to look very closely at that picture. As always, of course, this will be on our Facebook page and on our newsletter and on our website in the next couple of days. But I think that's really good. Okay, so have a good look at it as well, as I said, when it gets on home. So just before we start tonight's programme fully, let's look at what's happening at the club this coming week. So on Saturday at 10 o'clock, it's Koblenz Sked, as usual, our monthly Sked with our twin town in Germany on 7.123 megahertz at 10 o'clock local time. Sunday at 7 o'clock, we've got the GB2RS News on repeat at GB3NB. On Monday night, the 15th of November at 7:30, we've got the Monday Night Net with host this week Dave G0ELJ. And at 8:30, the 80 metre CW net on 3.543 megahertz. And next Wednesday here on NARC Live, we're going to do another Tony's Repair Shop. We're going to see him later on anyway, but this is...
I've got Tony's technical topics.
Yeah, but that's okay. That's what he's going to do. Well, he's going to be here, as in here in this studio, or in our studio next door, Studio B, as we call it, live, with a bench and soldering iron and equipment and everything else. And he's going to show you how to repair something. I think it's a power supply, but I think he also wouldn't mind me saying that if you've got something that you want to challenge him with, some advice or anything like that, he will be here live. We'll be able to read questions and things to him. And maybe, who knows, if you get it in early enough, we might even be able to sort out the bit of equipment comes here. And I know I'm putting him on the spot there, but we could even have a look at it. So there we are. There's an offer for you. If you've got a piece of equipment that needs fixing, and I've got a thumbs up from Tony on the monitor in the corner of the studio as well. So if you have something that needs to be fixed, no washing machines, no tumble dryers, no things like that, dishwashers, but a radio or electronic-y type thing, especially amateur radio, which is what Tony's speciality is, then get in touch with us quickly and we'll see if we can get it, and then maybe we can look at it live next week on the show, and we'll go through the thought processes that Tony goes through when he goes to repair something. All right, so that's live here next Wednesday at NARC Live at 7:30. And finally, just to tell you, we sent 2 of these cards this week. This is our card, of course, which we're happy to send to anybody at all who you think will be cheered by it. It's from the club, and we'll sign it and add your name as well to ours and send it anywhere at all. We sent 2 this week. Cheers people up. Radio at dcpmicro.com from tomorrow lunchtime-ish, I think, is safest. Otherwise, if it bounces back, just be patient and retry it. We've got no way of knowing exactly when PlusNet emails are going to be back on. If you have recently just joined us, by the way, I'm just going to mention it. I'm not going to keep talking about it, but PlusNet is our ISP provider. Our internet's fine, but our emails and everybody else's emails on PlusNet are not going through from about 1 or 2 in the morning this morning. So just give it a little bit of time before you email us for next week's show. Now on to tonight's main event, which is all about ICNIRP, that thing that we probably hadn't even heard about until, say, about a year ago, when publications like Practical Wireless and Radcom started talking about it. And it's something actually that's been going on for quite some time. It's not anything new. It stands for International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, which doesn't on the face of it sound like anything to do with amateur radio, but it is. And Ofcom have now adopted it for the UK. And that means pretty much anybody who has a license to transmit, not just amateurs, but that includes television companies, taxi companies, if you've got boat or anything like that. If you transmit, you will be subject to these regulations called the ICNIRP regulations, which have been actually in force around the world for quite some time. We're one of the last ones to it. I remember one of the programs we hosted, actually someone said that we should look upon it that we've had a holiday, really, in that we've got off lightly, in other words, for some years, but we now have to comply. And the reason for doing this again tonight, even though we did something in May, is that on November the 18th, which is a week tomorrow, you should comply with the regulations if you transmit on 110 megahertz or above. Now, one little bit of misinformation. I'm not here as the radio amateur police or anything like that, but I am here as the chairman of this club, and I think we have a responsibility to you, as many of you licensed amateurs, to inform you. And there is a bit of misinformation out there, in particular the things I've heard spoken like, oh well, if you don't transmit over 10 watts, it doesn't apply to you. That's not true. It really isn't. It's likely that if you don't transmit more than 10 watts, that you will comply with the regulations. But what every amateur has to do is do an assessment, and that's what it's really all about. Now, on the Ofcom website, and I know Tammy's quite busy on things here, if we could just show the Ofcom web address, could we, Tammy, please? Sorry about that. I know we've got quite a few captions. So this is the official Ofcom web link. Now, you should have got this if you were a licensed amateur. You should have got a letter from Ofcom which would have told you about this, and that was a lot earlier this year, in about March this year, and it would have probably came by email, by the way, but it was still a letter. And this was the information. Now, the information on the Ofcom website is fine, but it is very general. It's not specifically for radio amateurs. As I said, it applies to all spectrum users, people like, television broadcasters and marine use, and anybody really who transmits pretty much is going to be needs to assess these regulations. So the one that we recommend you look at is this one, which has been done by the RSGB. And this is rsgb.org/EMF. They've done a huge amount of work. They started work on it over a year ago now with a team of volunteers to try and make the Ofcom calculator, which is in a kind of Excel spreadsheet form, to make it more friendly for radio amateurs and more relevant, including a lot of the antennas and the radios and things that we already use. So I would personally recommend that you look at that rather than the Ofcom one, just because I think you'll find it's much more relevant to you, and you won't be just looking at something that's general written for anybody who transmits. Now, on that link, you'll see there's a whole page of information, lots of links, but there's a key thing in around about the middle of the page. There is a thing called a calculator, which you can download. But before you do that, there's an 8-page document that they've completed. I'm giving you advice about what you need to do. So we have got a lot of experts with us tonight who have come on to help us this evening. But just to remind you again, it applies if you transmit on over 110 megahertz. So for us, mainly, that's going to be 2 meters or above. So 2 meters, 70 centimeters, etc. Doesn't matter what power you're running. If you transmit, you will be subject to these assessments. And what you should do is do an assessment, print it out, and then clip it to your license, or if you prefer, store it electronically. But it's up to all of us to do that if you do transmit. There's lots of advice out there, and hopefully you got the newsletter, the extra newsletter I sent on Monday, I believe, because our friends in the King's Lynn Radio Club did an excellent talk on this last week at their club, actually. And depending on how much time we've got tonight, we might even show it, because it goes through a lot of the regulations and a lot of the things that you need to do. But first, we'll open it up to the floor in a minute and just see what sort of questions and things come back. So let's go to our team who are on Zoom at the moment with us. And you are welcome, as I said earlier, to join us on Zoom from at home as well. But we've got with us, if we could have a look at those, Tammy, we've got Mike, G8EEY in the top left there, and Tony at G0MQG. There are 2 EMC advisors. Every club should have at least one EMC advisor. And to the right of them is Steve G0KY, and he's here really because he knows quite a lot about antennas and antenna modelling. So they'll be here to help us with this. And if you have any particular questions about it, if you've tried to do it and failed, or if you've tried to do it and succeeded, and you've got any advice that you'd like to impart to others, or you've got questions that you'd like to ask, this would be a great time to do it. You can either do that on Facebook or on BATC in the usual way, or better still, join us on Zoom and you can ask them and we can interact and talk directly as well. So I'm going to first go over to both advisors I'm going to start with Tony, if that's all right, Tammy. And I know Tammy's going to do the sort of vision switching here and things, because I know he's been asked recently by a couple of amateurs for some help and advice. So maybe if I can start with you, Tony, and see what your experience is of this so far.
Tony's just unmute.
Oh, Tony, you need to unmute. Sorry, we can't unmute you, but if you could press unmute, that would be great. There we go.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, fine. Thank you.
Fine. Yeah, I've done 3 for various club members whose name and call signs I'll keep to myself for the time being. 2 of them, I done the calculation using, I believe it was a German assessment, if that's the correct word. So I've just got to run through them ones again using the RSGB/Ofcom one. And a 3rd member phoned me yesterday, and to quote his words, he couldn't get his head around it. But he's quite an intelligent bloke. And I went round to see him this morning. I took the laptop with me, and I showed him where on the RSGB's website the where you can download it from, the address you just showed us, and where on that page you can click on the link. And I done that, and they were then able to do it themselves, so I left them to it. So that was my experience. 2 of them, as I say, I done a few weeks ago, and I shall have to quickly run through them again. I got all the figures, but I ran it through the wrong program, so I've just got to do that again. And that I shall do either later this evening or tomorrow morning, and then email it to the relevant people. Okay. I do wonder whether we're going to get more members who simply, not so sure if it's the correct term to use, haven't a clue. 2 of them I done it for. I seem lost at the outset. I know of 2 others who, for various reasons, who again I'll keep to myself, who will have to help them in one way or another, and I think you know who, David. And I'll be surprised if someone else doesn't come forward. I'm not volunteering myself to go around everybody's house, measure lengths of feeders and look at aerial types and what the power output of their linear is if they've got one. I don't want to be doing all that kind of thing. I've done it on 2 occasions. 3 occasions, beg your pardon. But I don't want to do it anymore. So I'm inclined to agree that we should encourage people to do it themselves. But I think there will be people who will need help.
Sure.
Anyway, over to you, David.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Yeah, and absolutely. And that's why we're doing tonight. That's the whole point about tonight, and that's why you're there. And as our advisors as well, we're certainly able to help. But what we can't do, and shouldn't do really, is come round and do it all for you. And one of the reasons, apart from the fact that you should understand it anyway, because it's now part of your license, remember. If you now download your license again from the Ofcom website, you'll find this is all built into it. But one of the reasons is that, of course, if you make any changes in your station, you're going to need to understand this and be able to do another assessment just to make sure that it copes with maybe a new type of antenna you've put up, a new radio, different feeder or something like that. I'm going to go now to our other EMC advisor just for his take on it, Mike, G8EEY. So, Mike, if you can just give us any feeling you've got as we start this evening and talking about ICNIRP.
Well, David, I think you've just about said everything I would say. Yes, that's the main thing. We really need people to find out how to do it and get used to doing it, which isn't actually that difficult in the end. The forms are fairly straightforward and intuitive to fill in, and it does do all the calculations for you. And it will show you whether or not you're compliant. You'll find that if you can change things like height of antennas or power or duty cycle, you can see how to bring those figures down to a point where you are compliant. But you certainly need to log all the results. Even if you're running a handheld with a rubber duck, you still need to actually do an assessment, show that it's compliant, and log it so that when the man from Ofcom turns up on your doorstep and says, I want to see these forms, you'll have them all filled in and ready to go. And as David says, of course, if we do it for you and then you change anything, there's no way we're going to know that you've done that and you'll then find that you may be running something that is no longer compliant without realizing it.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Mike. Well, I'll tell you what we've got here. Tammy downloaded this, I think this is a still from the RSGB calculator earlier. So just give everybody at home, if you haven't had a chance to have a look at this yet. Now, although this appears like a sort of form that you'd print out, it is actually an online calculator, or it's an active calculator. It's based on Excel, but it works with many other spreadsheets as well, and there's advice on the RSGB website as well how to use it with other things. But it's a kind of template which makes it a lot easier to look at. And although there looks like an awful lot of information there, let me just try and take you through that, and maybe with Tony and Mike and Steve as well, if you can correct me if I'm wrong or if I miss anything. But we're just going to start with this picture now. So if we look in the top left, we've got name, call sign. These are just fields, as they're called, where you just literally type your name, you type your call sign, you type in your radio make and model. Actually, there's nothing more there than it's just a record of them. They're not going to do anything. There's nothing active about them. You've then got your date of compliance check. That's the date you're going to finish doing this particular assessment. And then on the right of that at the top, you've got your station address. So all that's really straightforward stuff. And all you literally have to do is type in those details. The bits down below now, there's quite a lot of information, depending on what device you're watching this on, whether you can see that clearly or not. And I'm going to assume you can't, so I'll just take you through the basics. But the bits you're really looking for are the big bright yellow blocks, and there's not many of them. What is there? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, maybe 10 or 12 at the most. They're the bits that you're going to enter information in. Okay, that's all. All those other figures are going to be generated for you. And in fact, the whole form, the idea at the end, it will tell you whether you are comply or not. So this really is a very, very useful tool. It's based on the Ofcom calculator, but the RSGB have tailored it, and they've put things in like, for example, if you can see the middle box in about the middle of the picture, you've got cable type, and it's got RG213 there. Oh, it is active, is it, Tammy? Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, beg your pardon. I didn't know this was an active one. So if you click on, you can now you can have a look there now. Thanks, Tammy. That's excellent. So now you can see that if you just by clicking on that, you can see the different types of cable that you can choose. And I'll read again some of them to you. We're on RG213 at the moment, which is a good sort of average coax, better than RG58 for sort of VHF and up, which is what the main frequency that we're concerned with at the moment, because that's the regulation that comes in next Thursday. But there above it, you've got the Italian Airborne 5 and Hyperflex 13. You've got LDF 450 at the higher up there, which is a famous sort of Heliax type cable. You've got Mini 8. Further down below, we've got RG58A. At the bottom there, you've got Westflex 103. So I reckon with those few, that's going to cover most of the cable feeders that most of you are going to use. I've used myself 213 or Westflex underneath that. Occasionally you might use RG58 for small runs. And obviously you get more losses on VHF with that. But anyway, you get what we're just trying to do here is give you an idea so that you're not frightened by it. And this is downloadable from that page that we put, and it's right in bang smack in the middle of this as well, rsgb.org/EMF. And it tells you, if we could click on something else, Tammy, maybe. If we look on the left now, we've got the yellow box on the left, top left, is digital. So if Tammy clicks on that, just on the box, the one next to it, Tammy, there. Okay. There we go. Now, you can see there, we've got digital, that's the one that's selected at the moment, but we've got other modes as well. We've got CW, got analog TV, AM, AFSK, but I should think the one that most of you will use, at least some of the time, if we look a bit further down, is FM. So if Tammy moves her cursor down and selects FM, there we are. Now we've selected FM. And so on. And we're not going to do the whole thing here live for you, but you can get the idea that hopefully you could see this is not actually quite as frightening as it may appear when you just read about this thing, and you maybe want to just leave it alone or hope someone else is going to come around and do it for you. One other thing I'd like to talk about, maybe with the advice of Mike and Tony there as well, one thing that you may not quite understand is this transmit % in 6 minutes. Now, because I might sound like an expert on this, I'm not, but it's just that I've hosted several webinars and things on this now, so I've learned quite a lot from the experts. And this is all about how much in an average 6-minute time you're going to transmit. So it's how much of your time in percent. So if you're having a little rag chew with somebody, typically a friend, and you might have a 1 minute over, then he has a 1 minute over, then you come back and backwards and forwards. Say you did it roughly transmitted roughly half the time, you in that box you'd put 50%. This is down to your honesty and integrity and being, unless you're going to sit and do a broadcast, which you're obviously not allowed to do, but if you were going to talk for 30 minutes continuously, then that would be maybe 100%. But for most people, that will be less than 100% that it defaults to there. So, Tony, Mike, I'm doing all the talking here. You're the experts, our EMC experts. Have you got any thoughts on this while we've got this calculator on the screen? Tony, you've just muted. Sorry, unfortunately. That's it.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Right, okay. Yeah, that's exactly what I was using this afternoon with one of our club members. And as you say, the cable type is a drop-down menu. So is the mode, the transmitter power, and the duty cycle, if you want to call it that, the transmit percentage. You have to type the figures in. But all the white boxes, the calculations are done for you. When you enter the power output, the duty cycle, cable length, and other losses, all the other figures will fall into place. And even the antenna type up on the right hand side, 10 element Yagi is selected, but most of the others, that's a drop down, right? That's it, yeah. And most of the others that we're likely to come across will be on there somewhere.
I mean, I'm thinking of collinear.
Yeah, it's a lot easier than it looks.
Yes.
Might look a bit frightening to one or two people, but you only have to do the yellow boxes. All the white ones will fill themselves in once you've filled in the yellow boxes or have selected the correct item off the drop-down menu.
Exactly, yeah. So I did say that I was going to read them through, and I'll come to you in a moment, Mike, but let me just for the sake of completeness, for everybody at home who can't read what all these things are. So firstly, we're just looking at the yellow boxes. They're the only things that you need to put something in, the bright yellow boxes. Okay, so at the top, it says band 2 meters. That's where we're probably going to start because it starts at 110 megahertz. Remember this particular assessment deadline. Then we've got the mode, which we looked at, which is FM. We've got it set to at the moment. The next box down below, which you need to enter something in, is transmitted or linear power. So that's obviously going to be your maximum amount that you're going to transmit. If your rig goes to 50 watts and you transmit at 50 watts, then it's going to be that, but maybe you have less. But you can always put that in to start with to see how you go with your assessment. The next bit down, that yellow, was the one we've just talked about. The fancy name is duty cycle, but that sounds a bit frightening. It's actually, as they've put there in plain English, the transmit percentage in 6 minutes. So in 6 minutes, roughly, how much of that are you going to talk for? I don't know where the 6 minutes came from, but it is laid down in this international ICNIRP regulation. That's an average time that they're saying how much of that time in 6 minutes are you going to be transmitting. To the right now, in the middle there at the top, we've already looked at cables. That's the RG213. And next to it is the dB per 100 millimeters. Now that's the loss, and that's something you can easily look up from the cable manufacturer. They'll give you a decibel figure of loss on that cable. Now further,
that one will get filled in, David. When you
will it? Okay.
Length.
Fair enough. Further down, we've got cable length. That's the cable length from your transmitter to the antenna. And the reason they need to know that is, of course, if they know what the loss is, as you can see just above it, then, of course, they can work out how much power actually gets to the antenna. Then they've got other losses there. And then on the right-hand side, we've just looked at that briefly. There was a 10 element Yagi there, but it's the antenna type. Then underneath that, we've got antenna polarization, which is written horizontal there, but it could be vertical.
That's a drop-down menu as well, David.
Yes, sure. These are the sort I'm just explaining the sort of thing that people can enter. This is the only information that people have to actually enter. Then you've got and height below that. You've got the height of antenna in meters. So that's up to you. You just need to measure that with a tape measure or something like that. And that is pretty much it. Would you agree, Mike?
Yes, I'd agree with that. Certainly something to be wary of. Obviously, people may think, I only run 10 watts, therefore I don't need to worry about it too much. But of course, if you think about it, if your transmitter power is 10 watts and you've got a short run of feeder and then you've got a high gain antenna, then your radiated power is going to be over 10 watts. And you're almost certainly going to get the red box, bottom right-hand corner there is going to light up red, saying further assessment needed. Yes. You actually have to go down to get your EIRP down below 10 watts average or 100 watts peak before that changes to green. But if you're running low power, it will come up green, and all you need to do is make sure you keep a record of that. There's not much else to worry about there.
No, and the thing is that if you can see that the time that we've taken just to explain it, if you have all this information to hand, so you're going to go through it quickly again. So we've got the band that you're going to be on, what mode you're going to be on, what transmitted power you're going to be on, how much you're going to transmit in 6 minutes, the cable type, how long the cable is, other losses, the type of antenna, whether it's vertical or horizontally polarized or something else, and then the height of the antenna. And that is it. They're the bits of information that you could just scribble down on a piece of paper, come to your computer, enter it in here, and as Mike says, then when you press the button, it'll either light up, bottom right will light up either red if you need to do more work or you need to reduce your power or something like that, or it light up green. And in many cases, the people I've talked to, occasionally on the radio in the last week or two, they've found quite pleasantly surprised that it's lit up green, particularly, for example, if your antenna happens to be quite high up, away from everybody and away from people and away from things, then you're likely to probably have a green thing. So this is not anything necessarily to be worried about, but it's something you just should do and you should try. Now we've got with us, as well as our team of experts there, is Steve G0KYA. So I'm going to come to Steve now, and just for a bit of general advice, really, Steve. I know you're not on the EMC side of things, but you do have a great deal of experience with antennas.
Yeah, I was quite interested. I was playing with this tonight, and putting 10 watts of 70 SEMS into the calculator with a collinear, I found that it wasn't automatically compliant. It's not phenomenally out of it, but the gain of the collinear meant that you had suddenly you're given distances to be away from the antenna. So it's another point that you can't just say, oh, I run 10 watts, therefore it's okay. If you're running 10 watts into a 10 element Yagi or something, which on 70 SEMS is not uncommon, you'll find that you may have some compliance distances to worry about. And they're not massive. I think the distance that you had to be aware of something like 1 meter or something, but you can't just say, if you're running 10 watts, it's not a problem. And I think that's the point that Mike made, and I think it's very important to say that and repeat it again. Yeah,
agreed, Steve. And this is the way we started as well. This is important. You may be watching this as a relatively newly licensed M7, and you may run 10 watts, or you should run no more than 10 watts, let's face it. And you just may not think this applies to you. But as Steve and Mike and I've been saying this evening, it does apply to you. You do need to do this assessment. However, the chances are that you're probably going to, pass it very easily without making any changes. But it does depend. And if you're relatively new to this, and I know that you do go a little bit into antenna gain, but in case you really are quite new to it and you don't know this, although you might have 10 watts coming out of your transmitter, because the gain, which if you like is the amplification of an aerial, can be so good, instead of, for example, an omnidirectional aerial like a collinear or white stick as they're often called, where it puts the radio waves out in all sorts of directions, so the amount of energy is relatively low all around. If you put it into something like a Yagi, which is a directional antenna, a beam as sometimes called, it means that it's focusing all of that energy in one place, and that's when you can actually get significant gain or amplification from the power that you're putting in. And that, as Steve's just said, is why you might not comply if you're depending on where the aerial is and where it's located, etc., etc. So,
but the section where it says further assessment, of course, if you scroll down on the calculator, you'll find you've got a choice of two methods of doing the further assessment. I don't know whether you can do that on there. Yes, that's the way. And depending on whether you're vertical or horizontal, you'll find that both the methods will deal with the horizontal gains, but only the Ofcom version will deal with the vertical, because the pre-assessed equipment configurations, the PAEC, have only dealt with horizontal beams. And you'll find that a horizontal beam is actually a lot better than you would expect. And that you notice that although it said further assessment needed with the example above, and you'll find that the Ofcom method is giving the fact that you aren't compliant according to that. When you find out that you put in that it's a horizontal beam, you'll notice it comes up green, because this is compliant at ground level underneath, because they've actually modelled very accurately horizontal beams, and the Ofcom version doesn't deal with it very well. When you go vertical, nothing will appear in the PAEC section because it's not horizontal, and that's the only ones they've done. Hopefully they'll do vertical beams in the future and vertical antennas, at which point you need to make sure that although you've got the box red up the top there, you'll have a look down and see that there's the compliance distance, the separation required, and the separation available, and it will tell you you'll get green sections there when it's compliant. And that is your second level of checking the compliance. And it's the whole form put together, and you just need to make a note that you use the Ofcom secondary compliance to prove compliance. It's fairly straightforward. It's a new version compared with the old versions, the version 8, version 9, that only had the Ofcom calculation method. The new PAECs are being developed and are now a secondary method for horizontal beams only at the moment.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. I mean, it's good to point out as well that this is all based, that you see on the screen is what this calculator looks like if you load it into a spreadsheet type program. And by the way, LibreOffice is one of the programs I know that they show you how to use. And these sort of programs are free. They're open source programs, so you don't have to buy literally a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet to run these on, although most people would regard that as maybe the commercial standard. But LibreOffice and others as well, and we're showing this actually on an Apple Mac live, I think, Tammy, aren't we?
Yeah.
At the moment, so this is running on an Apple Mac. So if you've got Apple, don't worry, and we haven't got Excel on there either. So these things can be run. Yeah, Tony.
Yeah, just so people know, I run OpenOffice on this particular laptop that I'm using now, and this is the one I've done the calculation on. And OpenOffice is a free download.
Yes, exactly.
Make sure you get it from the right website, or you'll fill your computer with adverts.
Yes, absolutely. But there is a lot of open source programs. We will help you on any of these things, but we're here to help. But you do need to do some of these things yourself. But hopefully, by us taking you through that spreadsheet, you can see it's not rocket science. Most of those things that I asked were things that you would probably know, apart from maybe the cable length, which you might need to measure, and the height above of ground level. So it really isn't that difficult. Probably when we get into the HF ones, which incidentally don't come in until this time next year, so they come into force, I think, 18th of November 2022. So some time to go. They're going to be maybe a little bit more complicated, but partly because the antennas are so much more diverse and they're so different, and they're larger scale generally as well. So this is a great way to cut your teeth on it. So if you do just run a 2 meter, maybe collinear, which I should think is what the most popular, if we did a survey, I think that's what most people would be running, a 2 meter collinear. This is a great one to cut your teeth onto. And of course, as Mike and Tony have said as well, that these things are ongoing and they're improving all the time. And the RSGB made this freely available to everybody. Let's now go to some of our people who have joined us. So we've got Nev, Stephen and Sunny on there as well. So Nev, have you got any experience of doing this yet?
Not through to completion. There were But I've got to admit, it was a few months ago. I need to revisit it. But there were too many questions that I couldn't answer on the spreadsheet. Stupid questions, like what kind of coax am I using? Or I'm using something that was an offcut at the end of a silent key sale. I couldn't tell you what the cable is.
No, but
it's little things like that that you go, oh. The next one that I thought about just now, there's a question: height of antenna. Is that the height above the ground, the height above the roof, and are you measuring to the top or the bottom of the antenna?
I'll go to my IMC advisors for that. Mike, can I come to you about what that means?
Yeah, the height of the antenna is the height of the lowest point on the antenna. And although they say it's height above ground, if you're living in a 2-story building and your shack is on on the roof, and you've got people upstairs who are not licensed radio amateurs, it then becomes the height of the floor of the 2nd story. So yeah, it's a bit of a
I suspected that in my case, I don't want to get into particulars because it just bores people. But in my case, the antennas are directly above me, above the flat garage roof.
Yeah.
In all probability, I'm killing myself every time I key up.
Apparently, that doesn't matter. It's just you're only required to be safe with members of the public, and members of the public means including your family members. You are allowed
licensed as well.
Oh, in which case, no problem. Apparently, you can fry visiting radio amateurs. So long as they're radio amateurs, they don't count.
I'm not sure this is quite the advice that I expected that we'd be giving tonight, Mike. So
unfortunately, it is true. It's bizarre.
Well, it is a good, actually, but there is a serious point there. In fact, if you look at the regulations, they do talk about the public. And most of us, I think, wouldn't consider our family members in particular being the public. But as Mike's quite rightly said, the public in this case is the non-radio amateurs. So let's take an example. Say we set up a temporary station for a field day. And if everybody there is a licensed radio amateur, in theory, it doesn't apply there. But of course, you have to make sure that the public, everybody else, can't get near it. So there's quite deep meanings if you look at the details of these things, but that's generally applied. But it's very important to realise this does apply to your family as well. So if you've got something in the middle of your back garden and you think, well, nobody should ever be there except me and my family, then it does apply unless your whole family is licensed. So Nev, thanks for that what you've done so far. Let's go to Stephen now, M6KYF. You could unmute Stephen. We'd love to hear your experiences of ICNIRP. Have you made an attempt at filling in this form yet?
Good evening, everyone. Audio okay, David?
Audio's great, although your vision's a little bit juddery, but that's fine. Yeah. But we can hear you, and that's the most important thing here. Can you hear us? It was working fine, I think, when we saw him. Yeah. His pictures.
Okay. In a word, to answer your question, no. Yeah. Am I?
No, but that's.
I've got movement on my thumbnail here. Shall I keep talking?
Yeah, that's fine. We can hear you fine now, Stephen. Yeah. I mean, no, don't worry. You will not be the only one. I guarantee, in fact, at least 50% of the people probably watching this haven't done it yet, and there's a week to go. But that's why we're here, and that's why we're trying to unravel any of the mysteries and try and help anybody who's really struggling with something, maybe getting it to work or whatever, but also just really demystifying it. And it's not so difficult. There are not so many difficult things. I mean, Nev mentioned he didn't know what type of cable he was using, but actually most cables have got them printed on the side. And because the RSGB have now entered so many common cable types, with any luck, the type of cable that you've got going to your area, which you fitted 10 years ago and you've forgotten all about it, what cable it was, hopefully by looking at the side of the cable, you can read on there maybe what type of cable it is, and that's going to help you there no end. So what sort of station have you got there, Stephen?
Really, it's just right. I've got a collinear, 2-meter collinear on the gable end of the bungalow, and fed halfway down the garden, which isn't under discussion tonight anyway. And so FT897, as you can see from the license, pumping out 10 watts, no more. It's very simple setup so far. I don't envisage undue problems for it so far from what I've seen of it, except that when I tried to download the web, the spreadsheet, and I tried to call it up so I could have it in view while I'm talking to you, and in fact I just haven't had time to get the other window up on the screen in front of me. It won't download for me, but that's probably just something to do with my computer settings. From having a look at the spreadsheet, just frozen, really, I don't foresee any frightening problems, but that may be more because of ignorance than full command of the situation.
Well, no,
back to you.
Well, thank you, Stephen. No, I mean, to be honest, I think the first thing is you've identified that even though you're a foundation licensee and don't run more than 6 watts, that you do need to do it, and that's one of our main messages tonight. That don't just think that you're running on 10 watts. It doesn't apply, because it does. It applies to everybody who transmits. And all I can say is if you do have problems with it, I mean, so hopefully the problems actually I've heard anecdotally from people actually have been just running that spreadsheet, just getting it to run on a particular program. There are notes, as I said, LibreOffice I know is one they mentioned specifically on the RSGB website, but we've already mentioned Nev said he runs his on OpenOffice. We're running them here on, I guess, Numbers, aren't we?
Yep, Numbers.
So if you're an Apple person, Numbers is the default spreadsheet that's included with every Apple. I think both the...
No, I've got Windows, PC Windows 10, David.
Fine, okay, and then so that OpenOffice would be a good one because Nev there is running it on OpenOffice, that works, and LibreOffice. So there are plenty of things that can run it, and it doesn't take very long to download, I don't think, but it was sort of a few seconds. That I did download the latest one a few days ago. So if you get any problems though, Stephen, and that applies to anybody else, and you obviously give it a go, please be specific, but then send your query or question either care of us with radio@dcpmicro.com or directly to one of the EMC officers, and they will certainly help you. But what we can't do and what we shouldn't do, and hopefully we've explained that, is do it for you, because you do need to understand it, not least because if you ever make any changes to your station, you need to understand it. And also, of course, at the end of the day, when you run this assessment, you're going to get a red, no, it doesn't work, or a green, it works fine, and you're going to be compliant. And if it's a red, you need to understand what you need to do to change your station to do it. That might be simply reducing power, it might be putting the aerial higher if that's possible, or changing the type of antenna. There's no golden rule I can give here, but it is important that you give it a go. So Stephen, thanks for coming on tonight. As I said, and let us know if we can help you at all. I'm going to go now to Steve. Steve G. Ford GHO. Good to see you, Steve.
Hi. I haven't, I've looked at the calculator, but I haven't done any calculations because basically I've got no kit left. So it's effectively irrelevant for me.
Okay.
Mind you, while you were talking earlier on, I did have a quick look to see if there was anything that could be done for the handheld, but it doesn't seem to apply. But I haven't looked at it too closely.
No, I remember actually, Steve, it amuses me actually because I remember you sending in a picture of your shack when we did that competition. Who works from a shack like this? And your shack was a handheld sitting on a cloakroom table, I think, or something like that. So that was good. But let's just ask now, Mike and Tony, though, do they think does this apply to handhelds, or how does the ICNIRP regulations apply to handhelds?
Well, the recommendation is to use the pure output power of the handheld and assume that you've got a half-wave vertical dipole attached. And then the calculator will work on that, and it will probably tell you that you are fully compliant because the EIRP will be no more than the power that's coming out of the radio, effectively. And most radios run up to about 5 watts, so the chances of you coming over 10 watts EIRP with a half-wave dipole are low. So your little rubber ducky is going to be fine. But you do need to do the assessment and have the thing logged somewhere, so you can say, look, I've even done the handheld. Wherever I am, then that's fine.
That's good advice, Mike, I think, as well. And the other thing is that, not that we're encouraging you to ignore it, but the fact that you've just done something, there is no defence, really, not to know anything about this, because, as I said, Ofcom wrote to every licensed station to the email address that they had, which, to keep your licence regulations within the licence regulations, should be up to date and current. So they've already told everybody about this and the dates and everything. And so it's been widely publicised. And there is a lot of information out there, not just from us and from the RSGB, but from other organisations as well. And there are other online calculators. There are calculators, actually, which run completely online, which means that, in theory, you don't need to run a spreadsheet or anything like that. But just watch it, because as far as I know, there isn't one in Britain yet. There is one in Germany, and you just need to be a little bit careful about the local regulations, because these ICNIRP regulations are adopted in various countries, and some of the things may vary. But there are lots of online tools out there. So I think if there's one thing that we leave you with tonight, don't do nothing if you transmit on 110 megs or above. That's the key message that I think, if there's nothing else that we get over to you tonight. So anyway, thank you very much for joining us, Steve. He's disappeared off the screen now, but and there's a really good question about a handheld. I'm going to go to Sonny in a moment, but before that, I've just got a couple of questions that have come up on Facebook for starting with. Gordon Young has said, if I run 2 and 70, do I have to do 2 forms, 2 assessments, in other words? Who wants to take that? Tony?
Yes, I would say yes, you do need to do 2. I've certainly done so with mine. It's only a matter of filling the same spreadsheet again, so it's not really a problem. And what I've got, the last fella, Steve was his name, who
yes,
had the handheld. I done a calculation this afternoon, and just to see what I came up with a handheld, and it was compliant, of course. I put in a Bofung UV5R, one of these, just to see what happened. Put it in at 5 watts, no cable, because the aerial plugs straight onto the top. And I called it a quarter wave vertical. And yes, it was compliant, but it did come up with a compliance distance. And that was, if I ran 5 watts, if my memory serves me right, and I haven't got the spreadsheet in front of me, it was about 0.7 meters. If I reduced the power to 0.5 watts, which most handhelds you can do, it reduced down to 0.3 meters, or an old money about 1 foot. And a lot of people use handhelds like this. And that one concerned me a little bit. Obviously, you can get around that by using a speaker mic. But that was just one that I noticed.
Yeah.
So when
I think that the point to remember, Tony, as well, is it's not you they're worried about. It's the members of the public around you.
I'm worried about me.
It's a bit late now, mate.
Yeah, I know. I've been licensed 32 years. It's too late.
Well, it's a very good point, though. I mean, I know we're kind of joking about it all, and I guess it's because we're licensed and because we've had to do exams and courses and things to understand this stuff that basically they're saying, well, you should know what you're doing, and you should have responsibility for yourself. And I suppose that's what it is, because I'll link that to a comment that Rodney G0CBO has said on BATC, and he says, so are they saying that radio amateurs are immune to RF fields? Well, I don't think it is it? Not when I wasn't living in a Faraday cage the last time I looked. But on a more serious point to that, actually, Stuart Brooks has said on Facebook, what if you live on your own? So how do you assess that? I think Mike touched on this earlier, if you were living in a flat, for example, but obviously you've got kind of the public around you. How would you deal with that? Who wants to take that?
Oh, go on. You want to take it, Mike?
Basically, it's down to you live on your own, but presumably you've got members of the public passing around, and you need to make sure that no members of the public are going to be walking into your RF field when you're transmitting. If you've got a VHF antenna that's 20 feet above the ground and you're running not too unreasonable power, the chances are nobody's going to be able to get close to it without a set of steps or a ladder. So I think it's reasonable to assume that you are compliant, provided nobody's going to be close enough to the antenna. It does mean if you ask people to turn up to do work, you might need to make sure that the field inside the property is not within the exclusion zone of the antenna. But if you're not causing TBI and not having TBI, the chances are your RF field is not too high within the property, but you do need to do the assessment.
Sorry, Mike, just for the sake of relative beginners, TVI is TV interference, television interference. So it's whether you're causing interference to others already with transmitting is a sort of pretty good guide, I guess, is what you're saying.
Yeah. It's different these days. Digital TV just stops and freezes. In the olden days, you get patterning or audio breakthrough. But if you find your TV is on and it freezes, you might have a problem with RF inside the building.
Yes, because it just stops receiving a digital signal. And just sorry.
But it is a good point you're making, in that I think if there are any problems in the future with Ofcom, your neighbour complaining about TVI, neighbour complaining about any breakthrough on hi-fi or whatever, probably the Ofcom's first question will be, okay, let's have a look at your assessment. And I think that will become part of the future. And if you have a particularly nasty neighbour who's complaining and saying that you're causing them health problems, it will definitely be part of the future. That'll be the first thing that they ask for, to prove that you are compliant.
Really good point, Steve, I think, actually. Very, very good point. Because I remember, I've hosted quite a few of these things now, and there's some people are saying, oh, it won't apply to me, they'll never come after me, they haven't got the time, and all those sorts of things we're saying. But this is a very good point, because if you are causing some interference to somebody, previously maybe it was a bit more complex to come out and assess to see, if you were running within your regulations. Now, as you say, the minute that somebody from Ofcom, and they do go out, definitely, come to you, the first thing they may ask for is your ICNIRP assessment.
Yeah.
That's a very good point,
Absolutely.
Steve. I hadn't thought of it like that, and all the things I've done with this, and I've never heard that come up before, but I think that's a very good point, that it's something that might happen.
Well, I'm just looking at a worst case scenario, but I think that is something that is definitely going to come up in the future.
Yeah.
When there are disputes with neighbours, it's, it used to be a case of, are you causing interference or not? But then I think Ofcom, as this is their own regulation, will be, are you compliant with ICNIRP regulations? That will be the first stage. And if you're not, then why aren't you? And they could, I don't know, we'll see. We'll see in about 10 years' time.
Yeah, and it is just part of your licence now, as we said. I mean, I guess the courses, I noticed a comment from Stuart, M0JKB, on there a little while ago. It'd be kind of easier, he said, to almost give everybody else a kind of licence. But, I mean, it's going to be built into our courses now. It's going to be built into the exams very shortly, I'm sure. It'll be a question on the exams. A couple of other comments here from Doug Spooner, who's asking about the power supply earlier. He says, where I am, no members of the public are near me. But it doesn't mean you don't have to do this assessment, does it?
No, you still have to do the assessment. All you need to note is that you're not going to have anybody within range of the antenna. That's part of the assessment.
Yes. It's kind of proving it, really. As I said, Doug, everybody, Stuart, who's put some questions on, which I'll read in a moment, this is the important thing. You do need to do it. Don't listen to anybody who says, well, I'm only running 10 watts. I've got a nice big garden. Doesn't worry me. I mean, you can do that if you want, but you won't be within your license conditions then by not doing the assessment. And as someone said, if there's any interference nearby, remember, it may not be you as well. But if someone, I think we're still living in a world where if somebody suddenly can't get their TV reception right, or their broadband's going faulty or whatever, there are some people who just think, oh, that poke over there is a radio amateur with a big aerial, and report you, and you could have a knock on the door. I'm not trying to frighten you here, I promise you, but we are trying to say everybody who transmits should do this assessment on 110 megs at the moment or higher. But it isn't that difficult for most people. And if you need some help, as long as you're willing to give it a go yourself, contact us, say what the problem is, it doesn't work in the spreadsheet or whatever, we will try and help you, I promise you. let's have a look at some of the other comments coming on now. Stuart, I know, has said here, he says, I have no TVI, but that's fine, Stuart, but TVI obviously is other people who will be worried about it, maybe in your area. As I said, you don't know necessarily that other people aren't, and they could just complain, and you could get a knock on the door. So you still need to do it. Everybody needs to do this. Stuart says, my UHF and VHF is on my chimney on a bungalow. Fine. But then these things all apply that we've said, so you'll need to know how high the antenna is. Remember that it's the nearest part to the ground. So if it's a collinear, a white stick, which I know lots of us run, then it's the bottom of that collinear, the bottom radials probably, from that point to the ground. You need to assess how long the cable is. For myself, I only roughly estimated my cable length. They're not going to, I'm sure, anybody's going to, for a metre or so, plus or minus 1 or 2 metres, is not going to affect it much. Remember that the length of the cable is actually going to help you, because it's going to act as an attenuator slightly. So the power that's coming out the back of your radio, all of that power won't be reaching your antenna because of the losses through the cable. So that's all that's about. These aren't honestly that difficult things. In fact, thinking about this, I'm just going to ask our team here if this helps. I might, on this week's newsletter, do a little checklist of the things that people need to find out before they go on that calculator. Do you think that would be something quite useful? Just a simple bullet point list?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Yes, I agree with Mike. Yes, that'd be a very good thing to do. Well, while I've got it, let's go back to the handheld bits. And you jokingly said the only person affected who use a handheld like this as myself. You could be in a rally, there's a couple of dozen people around one stall looking at the latest piece of equipment, and you could have other people shoulder to shoulder with you. So that is something to bear in mind. And when I done the calculation earlier with the handheld, however much I reduced the power, I could not get the compliance distance less than 0.3 meters or 1 foot.
Yeah, okay, Tony, thanks. I'm just sorry. I am listening, but I'm also trying to read messages coming in from 3 different places. We've got some messages actually coming through Zoom. From Nev, says, yay, I found a scrap of coax and it has Westflex 103 written on it. So that's one barrier removed. Yay. As I said, in my limited experience, I'm not the most experienced radio amateur out there by any means, but unless it's very cheap cable, then within a metre, you'll normally have it written on the side what that cable is. And if it's of any kind of standard cable, an RG58 is one of the classic, most popular, it's going to be written on there what it is, and the chances are the RSGB calculator will have that cable in. This is why we're suggesting use the RSGB calculator and not the Ofcom one, which I believe from memory when I last looked at theirs just told you that you had to put in the losses and the velocity ratio and things like that, all the complex stuff you don't want to do. The RSGB have got the ratings of the particular cables, the specifications, and already pre-entered them. So it makes it so much easier if you know which cable it is. Just look on the side of the cable, you know, with a torch if you're doing it in the dark or whatever. You should find some faint white writing, normally white, on it and what that cable is, and there's a good chance it's already been configured in the calculator. Lots of other points. Just a moment, Tony, I will come back to you. We've got a question from Nev, M0NFY as well. Do we have to do assessments for non-amateur bands and equipment? If so, then do I have to assess the Wi-Fi connected Pi camera on the bird table, etc.? Now, I don't think, certainly it's not within our amateur conditions. Well, my thought would be it would be part of the manufacturer's responsibility to do that. But what do you think?
Well, technically, yes, but I tend to agree that it probably should be within the specification of the equipment. So that should actually come as part of the details of the equipment. The compliance factor should be in there.
Well, otherwise, everybody, in theory, who uses anything which transmits, anything, Wi-Fi, whatever, would have to do it, wouldn't they? So there must be some regulations to cover that, I would have thought. I was just going to come to Sonny, but he's disappeared. So I'll read another couple of points. I've got Paul Gunther from Poland, who sent us those lovely pictures of trains earlier. Just start mentioning that again. Mentioned it once, think we'll go away with it. He says, so these new rules will stop nearly all radio amateurs using linear amplifiers. Won't we all end up running QRP? Well, I think, Paul, generally it's about that antenna again and where you're located and how far away it is away from the public, which is any non-amateur, and that sort of thing. I think this is what people felt at the beginning, but from amateurs that I've heard and spoken to, heard about, it's not affected them as much as they expected, because they're not trying to take this hobby away from us, but they are just the regulations that have been adopted in many cases around the world and are now just reaching Britain. We're one of the last to sort of adopt it. In the interests of balance and free speech, I'm going to read what Feathers McGraw has also said on BATC. He says that hopefully people are now starting to see the absurdity of applying these rules to amateur radio. What actual harms are being prevented here? How many cases of harm by RF are we trying to reduce? It all seems wildly disproportionate. So I'm not passing judgment on that, but I'm reading it to be complete. All I would say, though, we didn't make the rules, we didn't ask for the rules, but the rules are there. The rules have been there internationally for a long time for many people. As I said to you earlier, one of the programs I hosted had somebody said that, you know, we're almost 30. We've had a 30-year holiday, and it's now reached the shores of Britain. I would personally, on a personal front, I would urge you all just to try it. You may be very surprised, and already you may not have to do a single thing to change your station. So don't live in the fear of God that this is going to kill your hobby. It doesn't have to. I know there'll be people in more challenging situations, you know, maybe with shared accommodation, that sort of thing. There might be some reassessments needed. But this isn't something you should ignore. This is the law now with our license. So if you believe in running things to your license, to the rules of your license, then you do need to take this into consideration now.
Yeah, I'd certainly say that if you're the sort of amateur who wants to do long distance, lots of DX, and you've got an NOV that allows you to run a kilowatt, and that's going into a horizontal beam at, say, 50 or 60 feet above the ground on a mast, you'd be surprised about how compliant that will be.
Yes, yes, Mike. Thanks. This is what honestly, from anecdotally, now just by listening to people talking about it, they were worried about it, and the people that have done it have been generally, a lot of them, surprised. They said, "Oh, there's nothing wrong." In my case, actually, we run a digipeater here, which is something that's on all the time, although it's not transmitting all the time. So it comes into that 6-minute thing. And I assessed, I can't remember now, I think I assessed that it ran for 30 seconds every 6 minutes as a reasonable assessment to put a beacon out. And it was fine, I didn't need to change anything. So in many cases, people won't have to change. You just need to do the assessment though. Going to read a couple of the other questions come back. David Cook has said, collinear is very generic. The dB gain can vary considerably, surely. M7 BLX. Quite right, David. What do somebody think about that? Can I come to Steve on that one? I wonder if you've got a feeling about that.
Yeah, I mean, I've just closed the spreadsheet, but you can specify collinear, but in there is the gain of the collinear, and you can change that gain to whatever you want. So I think they've just tried to make it easier for people to recognize an antenna. But certainly, if you know the gain of your collinear, horizontal gain, then put it in. It will vary by a couple of decibels probably, but so it won't make a massive difference. Also, just getting back to the point about the linears you were saying earlier, most people who are running linears into antennas have them at height, and I think that solves the problem immediately. If you've got an antenna at height, you are compliant. I think if it's going to be the odd case, it's somebody running a kilowatt linear into an antenna which is 3 foot off the ground is going to cause problems. And yes, you probably wouldn't be surprised to find that you're not compliant. But I really wouldn't worry about it too much. I'll just plug the figures in and see what you get. I was talking to somebody at RSGB, by the way, this is a funny story, on Saturday, and they were saying that the only way that they could actually measure the fields in the human body was to chop someone's leg off and put a meter across the bits that are chopped off. Well, that does kind of say what the absurdity of the whole thing is. But there we are.
It is.
Yeah, you can argue about it, but this is what we've got to do, so we'll do it.
It is, and if you remember whenever you did your licence, whether it was just a few weeks ago or many, many years ago, as in the case of many of us, you will remember that one of the most important aspects of it, and when you look at the number of points awarded to the particular questions and everything, it's about safety. And this in particular is about safety to others. That's what it's about. So I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong. This is not about, and people are, after all, joking here saying, well, does it matter then that we don't fly ourselves, whatever? We are deemed, having a license, to know enough about what we're doing to be safe. And that's why I guess at a foundation level, where it's the learning is at a relatively small level, a low level, that you're allowed to run 10 watts, whereas when you go to the advanced level, you're allowed to run 100 watts or more. So that's why this is about safety for others, the public. Anybody who isn't the radio amateur, it's about protecting them. So whether right or wrong, whether you believe in it or not, that's really what this is actually all about. Going to read a couple of other questions that have come in. Someone has said, it's just a question mark, so I don't know the name. Where is H_CL measured from and to? HCL, what regulation would that be? Do you know, any of you know what that is?
That's on the spreadsheet.
Oh, okay. Which
if you
one?
look at the bottom half,
Can we bring that up?
under the PAEC2 section, HCL is the distance from ground
okay.
There.
to the lower extreme of the exclusion zone.
Okay, I think that's great, Mike, because that's what I think this person's asking. Where is it measured from? So, okay, yeah, so I can see from that picture there, it's the ground level with the green.
Yep.
To the pink sort of circle, which is the bottom of the antenna. Is that right?
Bottom of the exclusion zone.
Oh, okay, bottom of the exclusion zone.
So below that, doesn't matter who or what is there, there is no problem. They are in outside the exclusion zone. So if your public are there, your antenna's compliant, provided those values come out correct.
Okay. Now I'm going to go over to someone we haven't talked to yet, because he disappeared for briefly, but he's back now, and that's Sonny, M0SYW. Don't look so surprised, Sonny. Hiya.
Oh!
Well,
hello, David. Good evening,
I mean, you're here of free will anyway, but I know that, and we'll all know, I'm sure, the amount of installations and things that you do for others. And I guess now when you help people with your demolition crew do this, you know, you're going to need to at least suggest to them, advise them that they need to do this assessment. Have you had any experience of this so far, either for yourself or people that you've installed for?
Well, as I've sat here, I've literally been putting my own setup in the calculator as we speak. I was then about to do my mobile setup, which was going to be quite interesting. So I'll let you know how I get on with that. I mean, it's a regulatory thing, right? It's a regulation. You can't ignore it. It's not to be ignored. The general advice is don't ignore it. And generally speaking, most of it, you've probably, it's very unlikely that you've got anything to worry about. Probably. I can't obviously put that as a statement because I don't know the specifics of your setup. So you do have to do it. You do have to use the calculator. And there's help and support in the club for you to use the calculator if you need the help to do it. But you need to do it. You are the licensee. You are responsible for your station. So there is assistance and help in the club for that and with that. I mean, I put mine in as a straight range example here. I mean, I'm fortunate enough that I have it's about a 9 meter pump up mast before I have a very big collinear on the top of it. And I looked on the Diamond website for the specifications of the antenna, and I know that it's roughly 9 dBs. And basically the vertical separation that's required for me is 7.2 meters. Well, that's as tall as it is anyway. So it's fine. It's compliant. You know, even people walking underneath it, which is it's on my property. It's in the middle of my property, so it's only people that are invited on my property that should be walking past it. But it's compliant, you know, and that's even me running 100 watts when I borrowed the club's 9700. So, you know, I'm compliant, even though I've got 100 watts on 2 meters. I've got a very big collinear, which has got 9 dBs of gain on it. I've got very, very good coax, which is only, it's about 5 dBs for 100 meters, and I've only got 13 meters of coax, so it's a huge amount of power that I can put out on 2 meters. And, you know, with the duty cycle for the 6 minutes in transmission, if you're in a standard QSO and you're full You know, your full ham on a QSO, 50% for me is the sort of maximum that it could ever be. You know, why would my transmitter be key down for 6 minutes? You know, so 50% is where I've put it. And let's say my station is compliant, but you know, it's hard to use words really, David. I just got to say that it's nothing to be afraid of, but you do need to do it, you know.
And I'm aware, and I just don't want to be someone who's seen ignoring the things that have been said. You know, I'm going to just read one more comment from Feathers McGraw. Don't know your real name, sorry. But, you know, he says how many people were harmed by RF in the last 5 years. If nobody's being harmed, this is all. Ofcom should not have agreed to these rules without a blanket exemption for amateur radio. When were we consulted before they signed up to ICNIRP? Well, I believe, but I might be wrong, I believe actually that Ofcom did ask for a consultation on it, maybe through the RSGB. Yep. But regardless, and is that right, Mike? I mean, do you remember that?
Yes.
I'm pretty sure.
Yes, that was sent to every radio amateur.
Right.
The invitation to join the consultation for quite some time.
Was that 2016, Mike, out of memory? Something like that.
Somewhere
16, 17, 18. It was definitely in that 3-year window.
Yeah, but and that's what my memory is of it as well. But I'm not trying to ignore the points that Feathers McGraw is making, honestly. But this isn't really the point of tonight, because this is a regulation. It has now come in. It does apply to our licenses. There is no more to debate or whatever. If you want to take it up with Ofcom, then obviously you and other individuals who are annoyed about it can do that. But I'm telling you the facts that as of next Thursday, the 18th of November, these are the rules. They do apply to your license. Even if you've got a copy of your license printed out and hanging on your wall, if you didn't print it recently, you'll find when you go to the Ofcom license that from that date, it is going to be law. So you need to comply, and you need to make it, basically, it just means you need to make an assessment. And so Sonny and everybody else has said here tonight, and many of the people anecdotally that I've heard from at the club, you may well be very surprised that you don't need to do a single thing to change. That's really all I want to talk about, the sort of politics of the decision, whether it's right or wrong or whatever, because I don't think that's the point of tonight. But I didn't want to be seen to ignore them either. So forgive me if I don't sort of read any more of those sort of comments out here, because those really are now need to be directed to Ofcom, because they're the ones that have enforced it onto our licenses. What about, somebody else has asked, again, I don't have a name, what about car top mobiles, please? So I guess you're talking about maybe the sort of magnetic group type thing. Anyway, cars, mobile radio, how does it apply? Who would like to take that?
Well, it does apply. You can work out the horizontal separation from the antenna required. Obviously, it's better if your antenna is in the middle of the roof. I did query this with Ofcom during the consultation, and I've queried it since without getting a really good answer. The obvious thing is that the main difficulty is, unless you're on the M25 or in a car park, as long as you're driving, you shouldn't have a problem, because nobody is going to be within the exclusion zone for more than 6 minutes at a time in any 6-minute period, or even approaching that, provided you're on the move. If you're parked up, then you do need to make sure that you keep people more than 2 or 3 meters from your antenna. It'll give you the Ofcom, the compliance distance, but you do need to keep people away from the car when you're transmitting. It does mean, of course, that you can see when people are approaching, because you're in the car and you can see out if you've got windows. And theoretically, if somebody approaches and decides to lean on your door, then you are supposed to stop transmitting if you're going to be going over the compliance limit.
Yeah, so I guess this is where the 6-minute thing as well can help, though, because that combined with the fact that when you're driving along, you're not transmitting all the time. And, you know, there has to be, do you not agree, Mike and Tony and everybody else there, a fair degree also of some common sense applied here. That doesn't mean that I'm just going to ignore the regulations, but it's like how much you transmit in 6 minutes. I mean, clearly, that's going to vary enormously. So there has to be some element of common sense applied. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if you're on a Monday night net and you've got 10 or 15 people on at the net, then you've got to divide your 6 minutes by 10 or 15, because you're not going to be doing a full 6 minutes. You're probably only going to be talking for 30 to 1 minute at the most. Otherwise, your net's going to go on for the rest of the day. So you have to use some degree of common sense in applying the regulations. You can't just be definitive, because it becomes too limiting. So you have to use common sense.
Okay. Anything else? Any thoughts on it, Tony? Steve?
Yes, I'd be inclined to agree with Mike. Common sense does prevail in a mobile situation. While I've got it, we were talking about cables earlier, and some people I know use RG58 on 2 meters and 70, and I suspect the reason being it's much cheaper than RG213. I've seen some pretty horrendous RG58s, and if you strip the outer sheath back, they've been rather miserly with the copper on the outer braid. So that means you could well get radiation from the cable, even with a flat SWR, as well as radiation from where it should be, i.e. the antenna.
Yes.
So that would be something.
I agree.
Use a decent quality cable.
I agree, Tony. In fact,
and on 2 and 70, I personally would use RG213. I wouldn't use RG58. That's just me.
That's because of the losses and things, yeah. I mean, I agree, and it's easy to say, you know, if you're reasonably well off, but, you know, if you buy a very cheap cable, you know, you really aren't doing yourself any favours, because you might have a brilliant radio and a really good antenna, but if you put cheap cable in between it, the losses and the leakages and everything else that you might get from that could wipe that out.
Your RF would be used in heating up the dielectric.
Exactly. So my advice generally to anybody, if your cable hasn't got anything written on it, that's probably a broad statement, but I would not use it, because that means that nobody's been prepared to put their name on it.
All my cables are RG213.
Yeah, so that's good.
David, just a note on the cables, as you have previously mentioned, most cables of decent manufacturers, as you say, have got a type stamped on it somewhere. Obviously, Nev's managed to find his, which is great. Westflex 103. From memory, it's about 8 dBs.
It's very good cable, yes. Actually,
it's quite good cable. It's not the best cable. It's not the worst cable. It's quite good cable. We could get into that. That's another whole conversation for a whole other night. Also, I did a demolition crew excursion recently, and I was with a very experienced amateur, and they didn't actually realise that on some cables, and I ran out to the garage to find an example, but I didn't have a piece of cable to hand. On some cables, where the marking of the manufacturer is, you also may get a meter distance mark. So if you were that concerned, I'm not saying that exists on every cable, because it certainly doesn't, because the bit that I found didn't have a mark. But on some of them, they do actually have the meters of distance. And I use that in my professional life, because obviously I know that if that's 34 meters from there to there, I need a bit of cable that's 38 meters to make it from one end to the other and have 2 meters at either end to play with it. But so on some cables, the distance is actually marked as well as the cable type. So that's just a bit of information as a tidbit.
I've seen it on network cable. I've never seen it on coax, but thanks for the tip.
Yeah, it does exist on coax. And the piece of coax that I had in my hand when I was at a destruction crew job had the distance marked on it. So I was even proven correct by my own theory, which
Wonderful.
is fantastic. And I've just done my mobile calculation. So at 50 watt, you know the radio I've got, David, it's a TND 710 from Kenwood. It's an APRS type radio. And I've even used, once again, I've used the 50% transmit in 6 minutes with the coax distances and the gain of the antenna that I've got, etc. The horizontal separation needed is 1.9 meters. So it's now in my head as a log that I need to make sure that people are 2 meters away from my my van if I'm sitting in the car park transmitting, which is very rare. You know, personally, I don't very often sit anywhere static. Causing radio waves, and like you say, if there's somebody within my vehicle, next to my vehicle for 6 minutes, it's pretty concerning, I would say. But so that's just to say that I've done the calculation as I've sat here, and it's just under 2 meters basically for my setup.
So that's not going to kill the hobby, is it? This is
no.
So I don't want to sound like I'm passing judgment on this is a good thing. I mean, I'm sure all of us would rather just not have it. Of course we would. It's you don't want more regulation or more things to change. But again, I'm going to say it again, from many of the people that I've heard from heard of. Anecdotally as well, for many, it's not affected anything they've got, and it's just a question of doing it. We're coming towards the end of things, I think, now, but I'd just like to mention, Stuart has, I saw he'd asked, and Sonny kindly had helped a reply, but Stuart asked, what the rating of an X30, which is a particular type of collinear, and just like I imagined, Sonny, you did what I did, and I was doing it on my phone, was just Googled it, and it comes up with the specification, and that is the specification that you need to put in terms of dB losses and things like that.
Yeah, and obviously most reputable antenna manufacturers will specify their gain of their antenna.
Yeah. And you looked on the Diamond website.
I was looking on the Diamond website because my big collinear at home is a Diamond. The antenna on my van is a Diamond. The antenna on my car is a Diamond. So I happened to be on the site at the time. So it wasn't too much effort for me to find an X30.
And again, and I think, there are definitely other manufacturers available.
Oh, definitely. There are other manufacturers available, totally.
But if you've got an antenna which has got no markings on it and the place you're buying it from hasn't got any idea, I would question anyway whether you really want to buy an antenna like that because you don't know how good or bad it is. But also, it is a measure of quality here. And it's something you just need to be aware of. Freddie Lucas, that's his Facebook name. This is Stuart M0JKB, says, as Sonny said, it's a regulation and therefore as responsible amateurs, we have to do it. Wait a few years for the introduction of the Health and Safety at Home Act. Well, I haven't heard of that one. Let's not open another can of worms. We've got enough cans open tonight. And Stuart, by the way, has come back and said, I've got the 213 SM65. So the RG213 is a pretty good medium sort of coax for VHF and up, isn't it? I think Westflex is better, I believe, from memory. But anyway.
And EcoFlex is better still.
Yes, I've used that myself. Right, okay, well, we're sort of wrapping it up now. The person who asked about the car mobiles has said thank you very much as well to you. So I'll just hand it over to the guys at home now, there on Zoom. Any further last-minute comments or anything from you?
I will just comment on Stuart's last one of alleged gain. It's completely accurate. We're not saying that manufacturers would, of course, publish results that are in no way, shape or form tweaked. But I always work on worst-case scenario. So I personally always round up whenever it comes to dBs anyway, just to give myself that extra bit of cover. If I've got an antenna gain of 8.9, I'm going to put 9 in the box. I'm not going to kid myself by doing that, personally anyway. Yes.
By the way, I must read out something as well. I'm going to come back to you guys, but I forgot that Peter M0VRA did send us a note. It says, I've compiled with the EMF assessment with very satisfactory results, although I feel that a glossary of both the mode of transmission and the antenna type would be useful to upcoming 2E0s who do not have the benefit of club support. For example, the 5/8 vertical whip does not get a mention and it appears in the training manual. This could be published on the RSGB website in only a couple of sentences for each item. I think that's a really excellent point. So I think if you all agree as well, I think that's maybe something I shall feed back to the RSGB because that's something that since that people have been trained in this country to those regulations and the RSGB are managing the licenses, the exams, then I think that probably should make sure that the specific antennas that are mentioned in the training should probably go on that spreadsheet as well. So I shall get that message to John Rogers, whose team it is who've been putting this together.
Sorry, David, can you was that a 5/8 antenna?
Yes, 5/8 and vertical whip. He says it doesn't get a mention.
I mean, playing with the calculator, Steve might be able to help a bit more there. I think playing with 5/8 which you can get the most amount of gain out of them is something like 3 dBs, but that's a rough figure, isn't it, Steve? I'm not putting words in mouth.
Yeah, that's probably an overstatement. But yeah, it's not going to be much.
Yeah.
No, it's just a general comment, though. I think that probably is, because it's a kind of standard that's mentioned in the training, probably wouldn't be a bad idea to at least mention it on there, because people are just starting in this. They need to know what they're doing. And not just 2E0s, actually, M7s, M6s as well need a bit of help in hand.
David, in the drop-down menu on the spreadsheet, where you put your aerial type, and there's not a custom...
Yes, there is.
Yes.
Yeah, so providing you know the figures, you
but
generate.
But that's the point, Tony, I think. But
Although it wouldn't be very easy to do.
No,
but
that's the point I think Tony Peter is trying to make, is that what's taught as a fairly standard antenna, a 5/8 vertical, it would be just nice if that was put in there. And I think that's just the point he's making. So, okay, well, look, thank you ever so much particularly to our advisors here.
Any more comments?
Have we got any more comments on here, Tony?
No, the guys on Zoom. I don't know if
So yeah, but I'll come back to you
Sorry.
at home. Particularly, we've got Mike, Tony, and Steve, and Sunny and Never there as well, and hopefully I know lots of other people are watching. We've got roughly something like 65 people watching on both the streams. So hopefully this has been useful to you as well. Any comments from you anyway, as we get ready to say farewell? Mike, Tony? Steve?
There was just that question on the BATC, Dave, sorry, which was from the question mark, whoever that is saying, should the derivative factor be used with the latest RSGB calculator?
They don't recommend using the directivity factor at all. That doesn't seem to be of any great benefit unless you are talking about a fixed beam that is maybe then you would be in an area where you might say, okay, provided it's pointing in a specific direction and nobody can go there, then yes, you use the shape of the lobe. But as beams are assumed to be rotating, they say do it for 360 degrees, which means no directivity factor.
Yeah, so assuming that your beam moves, and most people's beams, they do make the move to give a directivity, then yes, as you say, you need to assess that. Anything from anybody else now as we sort of wrap things up? Tony, Steve, or Sunny?
No, just to reiterate that message of don't panic, but do it.
Exactly. I think that's a perfect way to sum up, Sunny, and that is the point really. Whether you feel it's right or wrong, whether you can say I've been an amateur for 40, 50 years and I've never affected anybody, this isn't really about us as amateurs actually. This is not to protect us at all. That's why it doesn't apply to us. It just applies to everybody else who isn't an amateur. Whether we like it or not, it is here, it is a regulation, and it comes into force next Thursday, the 18th of November. And what we're doing as a club here is just trying to inform you of that and also trying to help you as well. So remember, if you have a go yourself, if you have a problem with it, in whatever form that is, and if you've tried to do it yourself, then please get in touch with us, and either I or our EMC advisors or anybody else I can put you in touch with will try and help you with a particular problem. But once again, thanks very much to everybody at home, particularly the guys on Zoom there, Mike, Steve and Tony as well. Thank you. Before I wrap up the programme properly though, I'm going to come back to Tony just because he happens to be our guest next week. So Tony, I just wondered if you wanted to add anything about what you're doing next week on your Tony's Repair Shop.
Well, I was going to bring a 20 amp power supply with me, and one or two of the internal bits you'll find in it, like the bridge rectifier, 2N3055 of course, probably the most famous power transistor ever. I was going to bring a microphone as well and show the sort of things you get fail on a microphone, open circuit leads, open circuit element if there's a dynamic one, things like that. I was asked earlier in the year if I could explain something that you can do with the simplest of test equipment, because not everyone's got an oscilloscope, a signal generator, a spectrum analyzer, and all the rest of it. So I've got to show what you can do with a multimeter. Very good, yes. So that was my thoughts. Well, that'd be lovely to see that. We had a talk, as you know, a few weeks ago from Alan Wolke in the States, and he talked about the multimeter and scope, but to see it for real, because his was a presentation, and to see it for real with one here, with a multimeter, that's really good, because a multimeter you can do an awful lot with, can't you? Well, you'll be surprised what you can do with them. I've got to bring my handheld one with me and show the sort of checks you can do, how you can check a bridge rectifier, how you can check a power transistor, stress the importance of using a power supply that's big enough, because I've seen one or two where the power transistors have gone short circuit, resulting in, not saying 13.8 volts at the output terminals, but something approaching 24. I've seen that a few times. Yeah, that's not what you want, is it? No, definitely not.
Well, let's
You do a lot of damage to a very expensive rig.
well, we're really looking forward to it, Tony. It was one of the highlights for us last year. It was, apart from anything else, we actually saw someone for real in person. I think it was the first time we had anybody sort of here. So we're looking forward to doing that. We'll set up lots of cameras and things, and a little handheld camera that I'll have like I did last year. I'll rig all that up so you can see stuff close up at home. I mentioned it earlier, and you did put your thumbs up. So if anybody, I mean, this is not a request for lots of things to suddenly appear here that you want repaired, but if you've got something particularly, if it's large, it would be very hard to say maybe do a handheld or something like that on this. But if you've got maybe a larger older rig or something like that, or receiver.
Handhelds, so it's a bit like trying to repair a watch.
Yeah.
I'm not very good at them things.
So no, we can't do that. But if
I
it's
try
a
and
larger,
avoid handhelds, especially as most often these days, a surface mount, and these don't work as well as they used to.
No. If you have something like that, though, that you think Tony can have a look at, then let us know. Let us know first. Don't drop it off or anything like that. And we'll put you in touch with Tony. And if it's something that we can include on the programme, we will. But we're really looking forward to...
Feel free to pass my email address on if you do get a request, because it's on QRZ.com anyway. So anyone can get it.
Well, you're really opening yourself up there, Tony. But it would be nice, wouldn't it? But I think we'll have a lot to talk about, a lot to see, and the way you think about fixing something. We're really looking forward to Tony's Repair Shop again. That's next week on NARC Live.
And I'll show you how you can do a power supply with very little information on it. There's one I had in mind to bring with me. I don't have a circuit diagram for it. I'll show you how you can wangle around that.
Well, looking forward to that, Tony. Thank you very much. And thanks again to all of you at home for joining in, and for those of you watching as well. That's the end of NARC Live for tonight. You know, I was worried that we'd even, with only one comment that I got by email, I was thinking, how are we going to get through the evening? It's an hour and 3/4 later. So that's wonderful. Thanks very much for taking part, and I hope it's been useful to you as well. Just to remind you then what's happening this week at the club. On Saturday at 10 o'clock local time, it's the Koblenz Sked on 7.123 megahertz. On Sunday at 7 o'clock, it's the GB2RS News on the GB3MB repeater. Monday Night Net with host Dave G0ELJ at 7:30, and at 8:30 the 80-meter CW Net on 3.543 megahertz. And next Wednesday, as you've just heard, we've got Tony G0MQG here live with lots of cameras and stuff like that, and we'll show you how he goes about fixing a power supply and maybe something else as well. Plus all the regular stuff. And please don't forget to let us have your news and things. Give it maybe until the day after tomorrow, just to make sure our email's back in running, but let us have your news and views, because we'd love to show them on the show. But that's about it from us tonight. So from Tammy, M0TC.
Goodbye.
Thanks for all your good work tonight as well, Tammy. I know you've been doing lots of division mixing there with
lots of buttons.
You have. Thank you very much. And to you at home, thanks for watching. We'll see you again next week for NARC Live. Bye-bye.